A light drizzle at first, soft and almost gentle, but before long it gathered strength, transforming into a full storm. The rhythmic tapping of raindrops against the windows filled Claire's quiet house, wrapping the evening in a weight she couldn't quite name. She had just settled onto the couch, a warm blanket tucked over her legs, her favorite book open in her hands, when the buzz of her phone broke the silence. The name glowing across the screen made her smile. Melissa. Her old college friend, someone she still thought of fondly, even though their conversations had grown few and far between over the years. Claire answered, her tone bright. Melissa, it's been forever. How are you? But Melissa's voice carried a strain that immediately caught Claire's attention. Claire, I hate to trouble you, but I'm stuck. My flight home from Chicago got pushed to tomorrow morning. Would it be all right if Ethan stayed with you tonight? I don't want him alone, and you're the only person close enough I trust. For a second, Claire hesitated. Ethan. She hadn't seen him in so long. Years, really. Her last image of him was that of a quiet, awkward teenager who barely looked up from his phone, always sitting off to the side whenever she visited Melissa's house. Of course, Claire said quickly, not wanting her pause to sound like reluctance. Send him over. He's more than welcome here. When the call ended, Claire glanced around her small, cozy living room. It had been ages since she'd had company overnight. The thought of hosting Ethan stirred something inside her, a mix of nervousness and anticipation she couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was just the unfamiliarity of having someone else in her quiet, ordered space. The doorbell rang not long after. When Claire opened the door, she almost didn't recognize him. Ethan stood on the porch with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, his hair damp and curling slightly from the rain. He was taller now, broader in the shoulders, his once boyish face shaped into sharp, mature lines. Yet his eyes, those same gentle, thoughtful eyes, were unmistakable. Hi, Claire, he said, smiling warmly. His voice had deepened, steady and rich. Ethan, oh my goodness, you've grown so much. Come in before you're drenched. She stepped aside quickly, ushering him into the glow of the living room. As he set his bag down in the hallway, Claire caught herself watching him a little too long. She blinked and turned away, silently scolding herself. It wasn't anything unusual, just surprise, she told herself. Time had turned the quiet boy she once knew into a young man who seemed entirely different, yet somehow familiar. I just made some tea, she said, moving toward the kitchen. Would you like a cup? Sure, thank you, Ethan replied, taking a seat at the table. The kettle began to whistle, filling the quiet. Claire poured 2 mugs and handed one to him, trying to keep the conversation easy. So, how have you been? It feels like I've missed whole chapters of your life. Ethan smiled, his laughter soft and genuine. A lot's happened. College has been, well, interesting. Mom probably tells you more about me than I ever do. Claire chuckled. She does brag quite a bit, especially about that program you got into. Their conversation flowed more naturally than she expected. He told her about his classes, his part-time job, his growing love for photography. He spoke with a quiet passion, and when he listened, he really listened. Eyes focused, expression attentive. It made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in a long while. She couldn't remember the last time someone looked at her as though every word she said mattered. As night deepened, the storm outside raged harder. Wind howled around the house, rattling the windows. Claire refilled their cups and caught the way Ethan's eyes softened when he laughed at her dry little jokes. The air between them carried a warmth, subtle, unspoken, yet impossible to miss. She told herself it was just the tea. After dinner, Ethan insisted on helping with the dishes. It's the least I can do, he said, rolling up his sleeves. Claire smiled. Your mother raised you well. They stood side by side at the sink, the sound of running water mixing with the steady drumming of the rain. Their hands brushed by accident, and a small spark jumped through her chest. She pulled away almost too quickly, pretending it hadn't happened, while Ethan quietly looked away. Later, she showed him to the guest room. The bed was neatly made, fresh towels folded on the chair. I hope this is all right, she said softly from the doorway. It's perfect. Thank you, he replied with a sincere smile. "Good night, then," she whispered. "Good night, Claire." She returned to her room but found no rest. Lying awake, she listened to the storm batter the roof, thoughts looping restlessly through her mind. She told herself it was nothing, that he was just Melissa's son, a guest. Yet her heart refused to listen. It replayed his laughter, his kindness, the quiet confidence in his voice. The clock ticked past midnight. Still, sleep evaded her. Somewhere in the house, she heard faint movement, the creak of the floorboards, the shift of someone stirring. She closed her eyes, trying to ignore it, but the awareness that he was just down the hall lingered, pulling at her thoughts. Thunder rolled in the distance. The house seemed to breathe with the storm. A fragile, nameless tension filled the air, something she couldn't quite define, but she felt it all the same. The storm outside refused to rest. The rain kept hammering the roof, each gust of wind rattling the windows. Claire tossed beneath her blanket, restless and unsettled. She told herself it was silly to feel this way. He was only a guest. Yet the memory of his laughter and the warmth in his eyes wouldn't fade. Sitting up, she stared at the faint glow spilling in from the hallway. The night felt heavy, endless, charged with something she couldn't shake. Then she heard it again, the soft creak of floorboards. Her breath caught. Quietly, she slipped out of bed, tightened her robe, and stepped into the hallway. Ethan's door was slightly ajar, light from his phone faintly illuminating his face. He sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling aimlessly, but his expression looked distant, thoughtful. Claire tapped gently on the doorframe. "Can't sleep?" Ethan looked up, startled, then relaxed. "Not really. The storm's too loud, or maybe it's just my mind that won't shut off." Leaning against the doorway, she nodded. "I know the feeling. Some nights just won't let you rest." He smiled faintly. "It's strange. Being here feels calm, but it also makes me think too much. Do you ever feel that way?" His honesty caught her off guard. She expected something casual, not something that reached deeper. "Yes," she admitted softly. "All the time." A comfortable silence stretched between them. Then Ethan gestured toward the living room. "Would you sit with me for a while? I doubt either of us is sleeping anytime soon." She hesitated, then nodded. Together they walked down the hall, the sound of rain following them. In the living room, Claire grabbed a blanket and spread it across both their laps as they sat on the couch. The faint glow from a candle she'd left earlier flickered, casting soft light across their faces. Neither spoke for a long moment. The quiet felt almost sacred, held together by the steady rhythm of the storm. Finally, Ethan broke it, his voice low. "You know, I don't usually talk about deeper things. Most conversations are surface level, school, work, the usual. But tonight feels different, like I can actually say what's on my mind." Claire's chest tightened. "Why do you think that is?" He looked at her, his expression sincere. "Because you don't treat me like I'm just some kid trying to figure things out. You actually listen. That's rare." His words settled heavily in her heart. She opened her mouth to respond, but for a moment, nothing came out. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her with such quiet truth. She felt both exposed and alive. "Ethan," she said softly, almost a whisper. "You're not a kid. You see things most people overlook, and that's something special. That matters." He studied her carefully, his eyes filled with a seriousness far beyond his age. "You're stronger than you realize, Claire. You've built this whole life, this home on your own. I can see it. But I also wonder if anyone ever tells you how much you deserve more than just getting by." Her breath caught. She hadn't expected that. The words seemed simple, yet they pierced through her defenses, touching a place she rarely let anyone near. She lowered her gaze, fiddling with a blanket. "I'm not sure I know what more even means anymore. Maybe it means not settling," he replied gently. "Not hiding what you really want. Not letting life pass while you wait for something to change." The honesty in his voice left her speechless. She wanted to respond to tell him how those words unsettled her, how they stirred something she had buried years ago. But she stayed quiet, afraid her voice might betray too much. The storm outside raged louder, thunder rolling through the sky, but inside the room it felt like time had slowed. Ethan leaned back against the couch, his shoulders relaxed, though his eyes still held that unwavering focus on her. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. "Of course," she whispered. "When I was younger, I always thought adults had everything figured out, that people your age knew all the answers, had life under control. But sitting here, I realize you're just as human as the rest of us. You're figuring it out too, aren't you?" A laugh escaped her lips, soft and almost sad. "You're wiser than you think, Ethan. Nobody ever really figures it out. We just learn to live with the questions." Their eyes met in the candlelight, and for a heartbeat the world outside disappeared. Claire felt the weight of his words sink into her heart. There was no judgment in his gaze, only understanding. Only the kind of connection that people spend years searching for. She shifted, pulling the blanket closer around herself, suddenly aware of how close they sat. Her pulse quickened, though she tried to steady it. She reminded herself silently. This was Ethan, Melissa's son. She had known him since he was young. Yet the undeniable truth lingered. He wasn't that boy anymore. He was a man. And he had just reached into a corner of her heart she thought was long closed. The clock on the wall ticked softly, reminding her that dawn was still far away. She wanted to speak, to confess how his words had shaken her, but her lips refused. The silence stretched again. Not heavy this time, but fragile, filled with something new and dangerous. Ethan finally broke it. "I don't expect you to say anything. I just needed you to know what I see." Claire swallowed hard, her voice barely audible. "You've given me a lot to think about," and that was the truth. She didn't know what the morning would bring, but she knew this night had already shifted something deep within her. Outside the storm roared, but inside two hearts sat quietly in its shadow, closer than either had planned, yet held apart by the weight of everything unspoken. The night deepened, and the storm outside showed no signs of easing. A flash of lightning lit up the living room, followed by a crash of thunder that rattled the walls. At that exact moment, the power flickered, then went out completely, leaving the house in sudden silence, except for the endless rain. Claire gasped softly. "Oh no, the power's gone." Ethan stood calm as if he'd expected it. "Do you have candles?" "Yes, in the kitchen drawer." She rose quickly, her footsteps guiding her through the dark. He followed with the faint glow of his phone screen lighting the way. Within minutes, the warm flicker of candlelight filled the house, chasing away the shadows. The glow softened everything, the furniture, the walls, even their faces. The storm felt less harsh now, though the tension in the air was stronger than ever. They settled back on the couch, the blanket still across them. Claire held her mug Oftia, though it had long grown cold. She wasn't thirsty. Her hands just needed something to hold. The silence was different now. With a hum of electricity gone, the quiet felt alive, pulsing between them like something invisible yet undeniable. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His voice was steady but low. "Claire, can I be honest about something?" Her heart quickened. Of course, hesitated as if weighing whether to continue. Finally, he said, "Tonight doesn't feel like just chance. It feels like I was meant to be here." Her breath caught. She wanted to ask what he meant, but the answer lingered in the air, unspoken. Instead, she looked down at her hands, trying to steady the storm inside her chest. "Ethan, you shouldn't say things like that," she whispered. "Why not?" His eyes searched hers, filled with sincerity. "It's the truth." She rose abruptly, pacing the room, needing distance to breathe. The flicker of candlelight followed her across the walls. "This isn't simple. You're Melissa's son. You're not supposed to be saying these things, Tom." He stood too, but he didn't move closer. He kept his distance, his voice calm, careful. "I know who I am, and I know who you are. I'm not blind to that. But I also know what I feel, and I can't pretend it isn't there." His words hither like waves. She turned toward the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and uncertain. Inside her chest, two voices battled reason, telling her this could never be, and longing, whispering that maybe, just maybe, life had placed him here for a reason. She pressed a hand against the cold glass. "You don't understand what you're saying. This can't lead anywhere. I'm not asking for anything," he said softly. "I just needed you to know, that's all." Claire turned back toward him. The candlelight carved shadows across his face, highlighting the honesty in his eyes. He wasn't demanding. He wasn't reckless. He was simply sincere, and that sincerity was what frightened her most. She sat down again, her body heavy with emotions she couldn't name. Ethan slowly lowered himself back to the couch, careful not to close the space too much. For a long time, they didn't speak. The storm outside filled the silence with its rhythm, like nature itself was listening. Finally, Claire broke the quiet, her voice trembling. "Do you know what you're doing to me?" His brows furrowed gently. "What do you mean?" "You're stirring feelings I thought I buried years ago. I've been safe in my little world, living quietly, convincing myself that's enough. And now you sit here telling me things I don't know how to handle." Ethan's expression softened. Not with pity, but with something deeper. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe you deserve to feel again." Her chest tightened, her throat dry. She wanted to argue, to push him away with logic and rules. But her heart betrayed her, beating louder, faster, as if it wanted to agree with him. The storm surged, thunder shaking the room, but neither of them moved. It felt like the entire world had narrowed to this living room this night. This fragile thread of honesty binding them together. Ethan leaned back, his voice barely above a whisper. "Claire, I'll never push you. I just want you to know that someone sees you. Not as Melissa's friend, not as the woman who lives alone, but as you, and that matters to me." Her eyes filled with tears she hadn't expected. She blinked quickly, turning away so he wouldn't notice. But he did. He didn't say anything, didn't reach for her, didn't try to close the gap. He simply let the silence hold her, giving her space to breathe, to feel, to decide. Minutes stretched like hours. The rain softened slightly, the thunder moving farther away. But the storm inside Claire's heart showed no sign of calming. She looked at him again, truly looked, and realized something had shifted. He wasn't just Melissa's son anymore, not in her eyes. He was a man standing on the edge of something neither of them could define. The candles flickered, their flames trembling, and in that fragile light, she whispered, "Ethan, what happens now?" His answer was simple, steady, nothing you don't want. That's the only answer. Her breath caught at his restraint. In a world where people often demanded, here was someone who simply waited. That alone pulled her closer, even as she fought to keep her distance. The night lingered, heavy with everything unspoken. No lines were crossed, no rules were broken, yet the air itself carried a secret neither of them could deny. When at last she rose, pulling the blanket tighter around her, she said softly, "We should try to sleep." He nodded, his expression calm, but his eyes alive with things unsaid. "Good night, Claire." She managed a small smile. "Good night, Ethan." As she walked back down the hallway to her room, her hands trembled. She knew nothing physical had happened, yet something irreversible had. A door had opened inside her, and she didn't know how to close it again. The storm outside faded slowly into silence, but the storm within her heart only grew stronger. The storm had finally passed. By the time the first light of dawn spilled through the curtains, the rain had stopped, leaving the world outside washed clean, the streets glistening beneath the soft glow of morning. Birds began to stir, their songs breaking the silence that had weighed on the house through the long night. Claire awoke to the faint warmth of sunlight across her face. Her body felt heavy, though she knew she had hardly slept. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind replayed Ethan's words. His voice steady, his gaze honest. She could still feel the weight of firmament between them, the kind that didn't fade just because the night had ended. She pushed herself out of bed, tying her robe and headed to the kitchen. The house smelled faintly of rain and candle wax. She filled the coffee maker, listening to the gurgle as it brewed, her hands trembling slightly as she set plates on the table. Preparing breakfast gave her something to focus on, something ordinary to ground her when everything inside felt anything but ordinary. Ethan appeared not long after, his hair slightly messy, his eyes carrying the same sleeplessness she felt. He wore a simple t-shirt, his duffel bag already packed and resting by the hallway. When their eyes met, Claire's chest tightened. "Good morning," he said quietly, as though the house itself demanded gentleness after what it had held through the night. "Morning," she replied, forcing a small smile. "I made coffee. There's toast, eggs. Help yourself." They sat across from each other at the table, the clinking of cutlery far louder than usual in the silence. Neither spoke at first. The sunlight painted golden streaks across the table, and yet, between them was a silence heavier than the storm had ever been. Finally, Etha sat down his fork and looked directly at her. His voice was calm but filled with meaning. "Claire about last night." She cut in quickly, her hands tightening around her coffee cup. "You don't have to explain. I understand. We were both caught in the moment. It was the storm, the late hour. It made everything feel more intense than it really was." But even as she said it, the words rang hollow. She knew it, and so did he. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his eyes steady. No, it wasn't just the storm. It wasn't just the night. I meant every word I said. Her heart pounded, though. She tried to keep her voice steady. Ethan, you can't. I can, he said firmly, but not unkindly. I'm not asking you for anything. I just need you to know that what I felt, what I still feel, isn't some passing thought. It's real. His honesty left her breathless. She stared at him, her throat tight, her mind racing. She wanted to tell him to stop, to remind him of who he was, of the boundaries that existed between them. And yet, deep inside, other part of Hertha, part that had been asleep for far too long, didn't want him to stop at all. She lowered her gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan, you don't realize how complicated this is. Your mother is my closest friend. I've known you since you were a boy. If she ever found out, he nodded slowly. I know. That's why I told you I don't expect anything. I just couldn't keep quiet because sometimes in life you meet someone or realize something that changes you, and pretending otherwise would be worse than the risk of saying it out loud. Claire's eyes stung, though she fought back tears. She looked at him again, and in the soft morning light, he seemed both impossibly young and undeniably mature all at once. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that his words were reckless. But she couldn't, because a part of her knew he wasn't wrong at all. The sound of her phone buzzing on the counter broke the moment. She rose quickly to answer it, her hands trembling as she picked it up. Melissa's name lit up the screen. Claude's stomach dropped, she answered, her voice steadying with effort. Melissa, are you home safe? Yes, Melissa replied cheerfully, unaware of the storm that had raged inside Claire's house. Landed a little while ago. I'll come pick Ethan up soon. Did he behave himself? Claire's eyes darted toward him, her chest tightening. She forced a laugh. Of course. He was wonderful. No trouble at all. They spoke briefly, and when the call ended, Claire set the phone down slowly. Ethan watched her, his expression calm, though his eyes held the weight of unspoken questions. She'll be here soon, Claire said softly. He nodded. Then, after a long pause, he stood, lifting his bag from the hallway. He walked back toward her, standing only a step away now. The closeness sent her heart racing. I'll never forget last night, he said quietly. Not because of what we did, because we didn't cross any lines, but because of what I realized. Her voice trembled. And what's that? He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. That sometimes the heart notices things the mind isn't ready to accept. And once you've noticed, you can't go back to pretending it doesn't exist. Her chest ached at his words. She wanted to reach for him to hold on to, confess that she felt the same storm inside her. But the sound of a car pulling up outside broke the fragile moment. Melissa had arrived. Ethan's eyes lingered on hers one last time. Then he gave a small, gentle smile, the kind that promised he wasn't angry. Wasn't impatient, only quietly hopeful. Goodbye. Claire, she swallowed hard. Goodbye, Ethan. He turned, opening the door. The morning light flooding in, Ash stepped outside. Claire stood frozen, her heart racing, her hands trembling. Through the window, she watched him greet his mother, slipping back into the role he had always played. To anyone else, nothing had changed. But inside Claire's home, everything had. She closed the door, leaning against it, her breath shaky. The house felt emptier than before, quieter yet filled with a memory she knew would never fade. As she sat by the window watching the sunlight brighten the world, she whispered to herself, "Some nights change everything, even if no one else ever knows." And though the day had only just begun, Claire understood one truth. The storm might have ended, but its echo would stay with her forever.